I welcome you all. Good afternoon, and I welcome you all to the second special lecture of the 2019 and 2020 session organized by the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication of Sri Shikshapan College. We are indeed honored to welcome Dr. Manoj N.Y, who is our guest speaker today, and he is an assistant professor in the Center for Culture, Media and Governance of Jamia Millia Islamia in New Delhi. And his area of specialization, although actually hails from literature, but his area of specialization is something more critical like his area of specialization includes anthropology, and he has worked extensively on two French philosophers of the modern era, two great French thinkers, namely Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. And he is the General Secretary of Deleuze and Guattari Studies India Collective. And he has a number of books and publications, but all of them are under publication process right now. So he doesn't want to name them at present. So without wasting much time, we will ask Dr. Manoj to start his lecture.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
Please continue. Yes, please continue, Manoj. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you so much, Mayuk, for inviting me for this lecture, and it's a great honor for me. The topic of the lecture as I have mentioned already, it's on informational ontology and the pandemic. And before going to that, that's what I was talking to Mayuk also. I'm seeing only myself on the camera, and it's too intimidating for me to see myself speaking. Right?
No, I'll be there. I'll be there sometimes. I'll be there sometimes. Please continue.
Yes. Okay. So the problem, this is actually a problem that when we had a conversation, there was a reference to Narcissus myth also, right? So it's a sort of like McLuhan talks about it. McLuhan talks about the problem of Narcissus. He says that it is not the self-love that's the problem with Narcissus. He says that Narcissus couldn't really understand the medium of water wherein which he saw his reflection, and it is his failure to understand the medium, or rather the numbing effect of that medium, right, of the water, to reflect himself or reflect Narcissus' image on that, and he failed to recognize the medium itself. That is where he saw the reflection. So really it is to kind of to scrutinize it closely, to scrutinize the medium that you are using very closely. Is that the failure that happened with Narcissus? I think we are also in the same situation right now. We are using a medium and we need to know what exactly the medium is. That is where I said reinventing the notion of medium. Or largely, I say this is sort of like technology creates some sort of an environment. So and that environment has to be known, or that environment has to be clearly known to us. We should not be numbed by the effect of that medium, or we should know it more closely and what exactly we are facing. So when I talk about this informational ontology and the pandemic, this is not a lecture on COVID-19, but it is a backdrop. This COVID-19 or the pandemic situation will be a backdrop to this gathering, as well as my reflection on it. So my focus is more on information society from a communication media studies perspective. And this pandemic becomes a context for such an exploration. So in this context, in this process, what do you say, this context, the pandemic, the situation we are in right now, that we are all kind of gathering together in an online platform, all these will be sort of reflected upon to understand the situation what we are in, or to understand even the notion of the medium itself. And I presume that I'm talking to undergrad students of Shikshayatan College affiliated to University of Calcutta. And I'm told that all of you guys are also familiar with Frankfurt School and their criticism on media and other communication theories as well. So our discussion is slightly deviating from that, like, what exactly, in what context these theories becomes increasingly redundant to understand the complexities of the situation we are in. So we all know that, like, everybody is aware of that we are living in an informational society, and we have used many terminologies to for this as well. We use post-industrial society, we sometimes use post-modern society, somewhere they use network society and the like. So trying to understand the situation, what do you mean by the statement that we are living in the age of information? Is it sort of a break from the older ordering of the world? Is it, or is it like just a continuation that you had some sort of mediation happening before, and then this just an extension of that? It's a continuation. So while addressing this question, we will try to elucidate the problematic, and then critically think about the methods that we use to deliberate on it. So I won't explain anything about Frankfurt School or other criticisms. Rather, it will be revealed through the course of our discussion whether it will be viable, whether it will be a viable method for us to understand the complexity of the situation that we are in. Right? I'm getting an echo.
Yes, 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 it's all right.
Okay. One way is to look at, like, how do we understand the situation that we are in an informational society, or what do you mean by this informational ontology, or what do you mean by this informational revolution? What is the peculiarity of it? One way to understand is it through, like, the technological change. Here, as Mayuk said, like, the two philosophers will be of quite helpful in understanding what's the situation that we are in. So I will invoke Deleuze and his small essay on postscript to the societies of control to explain what we are, the situation that we are in, or to understand critically what you mean by the societies of control, and what is the role of information in that, right? So when he wrote the essay postscript to the societies of control, what he was actually hinting at a transition from disciplinary society to societies of control. So what do you mean by this disciplinary societies? Foucault talks about this disciplinary societies. Sorry. Foucault talks about this disciplinary societies. So when we talk about Foucault, Althusser, and all those people are all kind of connected with institutions. You talk about ISA or RSA, like ideological state apparatus or repressive state apparatus. It's all connected with certain institutions. You say school, prison, um, church, and the like. So they are all basically Weberians in that sense, kind of developing the Weberian strand. And so when you talk about these disciplinary societies, you are encountering the institutions which in fact disciplines you. You as a subject becomes a disciplined subject molded by the spaces of enclosure. What do you mean by the spaces of enclosure? You look at your college, you look at your university, you look at the church, you look at the prison, well demarcated space, a spatiality that you're talking about. It is distributed in space and ordered in time. Very best example would be your timetable, right? Timetable. It is distributed like the way in which you are being disciplined in your college or in your universities. This timetable would be the best simplification of that. So what happens right now when he talks about like the transition from disciplinary society to something of a societies of control, how do we kind of contextualize it in our in our life? We are living in the world, we are living in the age of Tihar jail along with other. This is the very best example that can you. Tihar jail is already, it is not just like, the societies of the controlled society took over. The disciplinary society retains itself in some fashion, where in which you have Tihar jail and the other coexisting. So Tihar jail is a spaces of enclosure. When you talk about other, what exactly is other? What other implies? It implies a free floating control, which ideally replaces the spaces of enclosure, the disciplinary apparatus. What happens with other is that you are converted into a set of numbers, I mean, the 12-digit numbers, and that code, that is a code basically. Other is a code which kind of unlocks the information regarding you. Whether they, like, you know that you need other for taking an account, a bank account, you need Aadhaar for even taking a registered phone SIM card in order to get an internet connection. So it becomes mandatory for you to kind of engage with your social life. So that other, like you have many passwords. You might have, like, your Gmail password, your other, your phone might have another password to enter to, right? So this become a transcendent code among other codes, like, wherein which all those informations can be connected to one code. It becomes a transcendent code, it becomes a transcendent signifier. And what exactly is other is not something like, which is kind of spatially constructed. It becomes a free floating control. That is what he meant by a control, societies of control. It is not a space of enclosure, but a free floating control. And free floating control in the sense that, what, like, you say school as a space of enclosure, which is completely demarcated from the society with huge walls, and like the prison, right? There is a similarity. So that spaces of enclosure is something what you call a mold which molds you, right? A brick mold, creating a brick, giving the form and shape of a brick. That way, these spaces of enclosures are molds, already set molds, which kind of shape you, which kind of, what do you say, produce you as a subject, as a disciplinary subject. But the society, when it comes to the societies of control, this, as I said, like, spaces of enclosure kind of dissipates into a free floating space. What happens? The enclosure, the spaces of enclosure kind of liquidifies itself and flows into the whole of the society, wherein which you don't have an outside to it. You will always be inside of some sort of an enclosure. And that's what you mean by a free floating control, or what he calls, it's like a mold which modulates itself according to the situation. It is not just a mold, but mold itself is modulating in order to capture in order to create not an outside of it. There is no specific outside to it, right? So this actually talks about, when Deleuze talks about the contemporary society as societies of control, like, so he identifies the problematic of informational ontology as a sort of a diagrammatic control over us, right? So the another way to look at is through machines. He himself talks about, in that essay, he talks about three sorts of machine. You have like simple machines, like, lever, pulleys, and all those things that you study in physics. The second one would be the thermodynamic machines. Thermodynamic machine is something, what do you say, the steam engine and the rest, right? Factories, industries, and all. But what happens right now? We have a new machines of control. The most complicated machine is the informational machine. This raises certain philosophical concerns on the question of communication and information. And it also kind of reconstitutes the role of media and communication within it, right? So information, cybernetic machines This radically reconfigured the mode of communication and redefined the concept of communication itself. Aadhaar fits exactly in this paradigm. Should I take some questions or should I continue like this, whether I'm comprehensible to the students? Is there anyone else there?
Yeah, Manoj, I think you are understandable enough. You're comprehensible. So if we get any questions, I'll convey it to you. You can continue.
Okay. Okay. So when
Yeah.
you talk about the new machines, the cybernetic machines, it is slightly different from what you call the industrial machines. Industrial, the fallout of an industrial machine was what? Like, you talk about alienation and other stuffs and all, right? So what happens with the informational machine or the emergence of a controlled society, that marks the becoming sign of a subject. What do you mean by a becoming sign of a subject? I will explain it. It's not only becoming sign, there are new surveillance mode and new archiving strategy. What do you mean by, as I said becoming sign of the subject? I told you the example of Aadhaar card, right? Aadhaar card, your subjectivity is like you are doubled, basically. You are doubled uh, immensely. You are doubled into a data. Your subjectivity is getting transformed into a 12-digit number, and you becoming a sign. That is the becoming sign of the subject, right? You are reduced to a 12-digit number. We all know that, like, how do you know yourself as a subject? Like, what is the complete, who am I? That's the question. If you ask in an informational context, you say, who are you? What are you? Your phone might be one key to kind of enter into your data. Your credit card or your debit card will be another possibility to enter into your preferences and choices. Your loyalty cards, there are different cards, different codes and passwords that can open up to you. So what happens is that your subject, when you ask, you are completely, your subjectivity is kind of dispersed. Other, in a sense, is trying to collate all these things together to form a transcendent code, or you say a master code, which can combine all other informations together under one set of number and under one set of code, right? So when you talk about this controlled society, there is something what you call a new mode of surveillance also, which becomes the organizing principle of the contemporary life. We are actually talking about that. We are actually facing various sorts of surveillance methods right now. The centenary surveillance, it's sort of surveillance mechanisms like organized by the state. We are surveilling each other, whether there is any person coming from outside, whether he's going out and meeting someone. If he's infected, then he should be taken, she should be isolated. We ourselves impose sort of surveillance on us itself. It's a sort of a participatory surveillance. So when you talk about the surveillance, the architecture, the new mode of surveillance, it is not only by the state, but we do surveil each other. There is some sort of a decentralization of surveillance, and that is sort of a convergence between the official and the non-official non-official forms of surveillance. So as I said, like earlier, if you talk about the watchtower, normally you have, whenever you go to certain museums, certain spaces where you can see certain watchtowers. These watchtowers are completely dispersed and diffused. There is a network of CCTV cameras. There are other ways in which you can be kind of surveilled through your Facebook account, your other accounts, right, that you have. You are completely constantly under surveillance. There is a web of surveillance. The watchtower is completely dispersed. When I said the spaces of enclosure is getting transformed into a free floating control, this is a control mechanism that, so this becomes sort of a rhizomic model of surveillance. What sort of all things could be, your details are being dispersed in your employment records, your medical history, Your DNA contains your details. That is another sort of an information. You have ID cards, you have credit cards, debit cards, loyalty cards, CCTV footages. So there is something what you call a rhizomic model of surveillance. It's not just a government official surveilling you or something. You are caught up in the web of a surveillance mechanism, and this surveillance mechanism is not a centralized surveillance mechanism. It is kind of diffused and dispersed, right? So when you talk about your own self also, as a subject, your self is also kind of like an intersection of all these things, intersection of your past, different sort of passwords that you are having. Your passwords to your phone, it could be one way of entering into your details. Your password to your social media accounts, your secret questions, CCTVs, your biometric scans. So the self, or you, what you mean when you say who are I in a informational context, it's solely an emergent condition, and it is something revealed through a repetitious performance of passwords, online activity, and self surveillance. So when I talk about self, what about the body then, right? Where does the body negotiate in these sort of surveillance mechanisms? How do your body, so you have like all your biologicals coming back. You use your fingerprint right now for various reasons. Earlier it was signature, and Delos talks about it. Earlier it was signature, and it is not something that represents your biologicals. Is something which has a permanence to it. You have deep facial recognition, you have iris scan, your signature dynamics, your skin patterns, food dynamics, and even something like body odor also are sort of like used as the key to to your own self, like to know who you are basically. So body is the site of surveillance as well as the source of data which got enmeshed into a surveillance circuit. So surveillance establishes in a way, when you say there is a corporeal reality to the surveillance mechanism, say that we are our biology irrespective of our cultural or other identities. So this eversion means turning the inside out, your bodily informations, your fingerprint, your deep iris scan. So though that sort of details. And if skin is the first home that we occupy, right, and then biometrics sort of breaks the barrier of what you mean by the inside and the outside. The another way, how much time I have left? I have?
You have around half an hour. You have around half an hour. You can use.
Yeah. So another theoretician whom I can use to explore, to understand, as I said, in the introduction itself, what was the problem of Narcissus? Narcissus was not able to understand the medium of water and the capacity of the water to reflect his own image and he fell in love with that. The problem is not McLuhan would argue that problem is not that of the self-love, but his inability to understand the medium, inability to understand the numbness of that, the capability of numbing your phenomenological capabilities. That is where actually Virilio also plays. Paul Virilio is an important postmodern thinker who talks about speed. He is a theorist of speed. His premise is also the same. The premise is that technology generates new forms and puts human sensorium into a kind of a complex training, right? So we need to be aware of the medium. We need to seek to identify the structures which shape the way we perceive the reality, right? When you see something, you should be aware of the conditions of that perception, your own perception, you see, you smell, you touch. What are the conditions of that perception? He is also, even in one sense, McLuhan also is talking about media as the extension of man. What exactly is that? Media as the extension of man is the extension of your own sensorium. Like you amplify your visual capability, you amplify your audible capacity, right? Certain medias are amplifications or like like sort of restricting certain capabilities of you, right? It is an extension of the human sensorium. Here also the problem is that this Benjamin and Virilio both talks about this, like you technology can bring in, or technology can create some sort of uh, a form through which you kind of encounter your own experience. Virilio talks about speed as the medium in which our experience unfolds, right? So what he talks about, when he talk about the informational ontology, we talks about the increasing speed of transmission, and this increasing speed of transmission shapes the individual perception of the reality. So what we have to do, we have to rediscover the world of sense perception, right, which is being shaped or trained by technology. So he gives this example, very simple example. Your own gaze to the world. He says that your understanding of the world, how we look at the world, is first and foremost an embodied gaze. That gaze is embodied in your body, your ability. See, we have two eyes on our friend. What if we had two eyes on our back as well, and on our sides as well, right? Our vision of the world would have been completely different, right? So if we were like, if we have eyes on the top, what if we had eyes on the foot, right? Like the perception would be completely different. And at the same time he talks about, like, that is this embodiment, the embodiment, because your gaze is already an embodied gaze, right? First and foremost, it's an embodied gaze. So that is all about the perception. But he talks about speed. He's a theoretician of speed, and even though he gives this example to explain how our perception can be kind of completely, like, what are the conditions in which that we perceive our reality whenever you perceive the reality. So when you say, like, while you're traveling in a car or a train, you see certain images, like, you see the surroundings and all those things. You see the trees, houses, like, passing you past. You see hills, lights of bends away. But the same which situation won't be the same if you are traveling across those lanes. You will encounter the tree looming over you, right? It won't fleet away like that. Your perception differs. What happens when, like, your perception changes when you are on foot and when you are on car or a train, right? What changes it? The speed determines your perception, right? So that he talks about dromology. Dromology is the science of speed. He talks about dromos, the Greek word for speed, right? So when you talk about speed, how speed limits and determines the manner in which phenomena appears to, or the world appears to us, right? It can limit and it can determine, right? It can determine the way in which this reality appears to you. So he would argue that there was no industrial revolution. There was only democratic revolution, only revolution in the speeds. No industrial revolution. It is all about the ever increasing speed. And this ever increasing speed is what causes the traditional political structure to implode as well from within. If the traditional political structures cannot really cope up with the speed that we are into, then it has to dissolve, right? So this progress, or what do you mean by the development, has been defined by some sort of an accelerated transmission. So you have this horse-drawn locomotion, then railways, age of telephone, radio, television, and the computer. If you look at, McLuhan also talks about this, like the transmission, the acceleration of it. So what does it imply? Virilio is critic of it. Virilio says that you will reach a point when there is no further acceleration possible. You hit the wall of acceleration, right? And then right now what happened is that all the machines are switched off. We have decelerated. We are trying to catch up with the information technology, like to increase our speed and all. Otherwise, all other machines are completely switched off. We have decelerated. So the speed is the medium in which our collective experience unfolds. It is itself a destiny and your destination also. What do you mean by destination? Destination, it's the destination that you want to achieve, right? You need to have 5G altogether right now. So speed space, when he talks about the speed space, this speed space is determined by two factors. One is the movement of the perceived object, the object that you're perceiving, right, in relation to your body. And second one is the light which illuminates the object for perception as a condition of possibility for vision. You know that, like, when you see something, how do you see something? Light falls on that body, and it reflects, and it falls on your eye, right? That is how you perceive that object. So the light which illuminates the object for perception. So when he talks about this informational, or what he calls information bomb, he talks about he talks of speed as the major characteristics of this environment, or this milieu, this informational milieu, right? Speed is enabling as well as limiting. It determines the ways in which things appears to us. So when he talks about speed, he actually complains about these fleeting forms, the fastly disappearing sceneries, right? When you have higher speed, there is something what you call a loss of fixity, of sensible reality. That he considers as a kind of a deception. He says that the fleeting nature of the dromoscopic forms, there is something what you call a loss of presence, under the simulacral experience of speed. So you need to have a science, a dromoscopy, to reveal this kind of so this light is something which is constitutive of dromosphere. You have the speed of light, which is a constant, right? You know that, right? So when you talk about the new global times, it cannot be understood in the classical theories based on past, present, and future. What we are facing right now is time is measured in nanoseconds, and new digital age of speed is thrust upon us. A chronological local time is superseded by a sort of an universal world time. To correct McLuhan, message is not exactly the medium, but the ultimate speed of its propagation, right? He would say every society is a race society. So in his major work, in Information Bomb, he says that the media activity should be considered as the same way as nuclear radio activity, right? So it is not something. Communication is no more a ritual or a transmission model of communication, but it has something to do with dromology, right? So we are getting into the last phase. So I have explained Deleuze, and I have explained Deleuze a bit, his notion of the societies of control, and Virilio's conception of speed, in order to understand what you mean by the information society. How do you kind of keeping this Narcissus example as sort of an or sort of a key to understand the the organization principle of our reality, right? In what world? When you say that you are in the living in the age of information, what is exactly that means to you? Like, how do you kind of understand that? What in what sort of a milieu that you are in? Like, when you talk about this information, right? Meaning of information. So I would say that all these sort of discussions boils down to the cybernetic revolution that happened in the 1960s. I would argue that that is kind of an ontological break. Cybernetic revolution was an ontological break that happened to us, and it kind of completely changed our own perception of the world, the way in which we identify ourselves. You are talking about the new surveillance method, new surveillance models, or you talk about yourself and your own body negotiating in the rhizomic surveillance assemblage, the circuit of surveillance assemblage. All those things boils down to the question of communication that has been posed in the 1960s by the cybernetic theoreticians. So what is exactly the problem with communication? We have this problem, like, when you say communication, as I said, ritual model of communication or meaning making, we always talk about signification. We talk about science. You talk about Barthes or Saussure or other people. They are all concerned with what you say, the meaning. Or to people, those who are taking it further into a cultural realm, they all talk about some sort of a signification or a science system. So you talk about certain hegemonic consensus, certain ideological resistances, certain dominant meanings that you can attribute to sort of communication and all those things, right? So information or communication, the larger discourse revolving around is that of this sort of, like, what you extend to the cultural domain. You actually, what you are doing is you are extending it into the realm of representation, right? So when you talk about when we talk about this sort of new information machines, the new machines that is right now with us, is something like what you call the informational machine. We can see that the Frankfurt School or the theoreticians of their theoretical approach is becoming increasingly redundant to an extent to understand the medium. I'm not talking about the other effects. You can even talk about a sort of alienation that you feel right now, even that's possible. But I'm talking about to understand the complexities of the medium itself. That won't be enough. And it is in this particular conjuncture that you have, like, post-humanism and post-structuralism emerging, right? And it does a double function. It interrogates the sterile paradigm of yesteryears, like Frankfurt School and the other dominant theoretical schools, and it also reorient the analysis of the present day world and new media in a sort of a new direction. So when you talk about information society, information is becoming a milieu. There is no meaning outside it, and this has a problem. This the question of how do you get out of the meaning and how it goes. Where I'm connecting this informational ontology to the pandemic is through the genetic information. I'm coming to that, and that will be my last point when you're talking about all these uh, thing. So what was the information or the communication was not primarily a problem related with meaning. It was an engineering problem. It was conceived as an engineering problem. What was the engineering problem there? Like, you say, I am communicating to you right now, I am talking to you, or we are on phone conversation. There is a person who talks to you. There is a message which gets transmitted through a medium, and it reaches to the receiver, right? We are talking about something, okay, fine. Whether you are getting that message comprehensively, you are talking about, we always talks about the signification, the encoding and the decoding and all those things, like in the decoding of the meaning, right? In that sense, it's like encoding and decoding, like the winking of an eye. How do you decode that wing of an eye as a sort of a sign, right? But here it is signal. So the engineering problem was that how to effectively transmit the message without any loss. That was the engineering problem that 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 it was faced. And Weiner talks about the transition from the the power engineering to the excuse me, power engineering to the informational engineering. That is a transition, right? So I'm talking about the problem of meaning, engineering problem. So Shannon and Weaver, they when they have the mathematical definition of information, they're they were not really worried about the semantic aspects of communication. The problem was to have a smooth passage of the reception, the communication through a particular medium. And the problem that they faced was the question of noise. You have signal and noise. Signal is what? Something which is pregnant with meaning. What do you say? When I am talking to you, you are listening to my voice. That means that is a meaningful conversation, right? You can identify that which is pregnant with meaning. If there are a lot of disturbances here, and you are not audible to hear me, my sound also gets involved or gets absorbed into that larger disturbances that is in the medium, then you cannot really listen to me, right? So you have the problem of the noise and the signal. So how do you kind of differentiate the noise and the signal, right? And it becomes, is that clear to you? If the noise and signal, how do you demarcate in this particular medium? Also, it becomes another problem. If it is completely devoid of meaning, right? If it is not meaningful at all, like for example, when you are converting it into frequency, when for an engineer, the meaning doesn't really matter, right? You have to invent another method to kind of reduce the noise. And the noise is not something which is coming from outside. It is sort of an inhuman demon within the medium itself in order to regulate the noise. So what we have to do is, like, you have to kind of bring up certain structures which can reduce, which can sort of control the noise. Certain filters can be used to control the noise, right? So noise become a philosophical problem, a problem in the question of communication, how to reduce, and that is something immanent to the medium. This is not something coming from outside, right? So what happens here is that for an engineer, meaning is the semantic aspect of this thing is completely under. It is not at all relevant. It's completely irrelevant for the engineer. She consider it as sort of a statistical compounds, right? For noise and signal. So for him is to demarcate these two. How to demarcate noise from the signal. And when you say you don't have a clue to how to differentiate that as well, there is no meaning to it. How will you differentiate noise from a signal? Because noise is something, would you say, pure nonsense, and signal would be something which makes sense. And if you are only considering it as some sort of a statistical compounds, a mathematical function, right? How do you distinguish it? Because meaning was only possibility to. So you come up with the idea of frequency. So you give a particular frequency to each, and you will kind of resolve the communicational problem. And here amplification won't be of any use, because if you amplify your noise, your signal, that won't help you. That you have to reduce the noise. So you cannot resolve the problem by amplification. So my point is that is for the first time you say your message or the information gets abstracted into something else, right? Gets abstracted into a code or something, into particular frequency. When you're talking about, when I'm talking about something right now, it is a sound wave, it gets abstracted into something and it is being transmitted through the medium and it is reaching you, right? It's some sort of an abstraction of information, or you say a codification of information, right? A codification of information. It is not about meaning, but how the signal is getting transmitted through the channel, and there is some sort of an abstraction happening. That is actually happening when you are listening to a gramophone, right? You converting that sound into something else that can be put on the gramophone group. And it happens with telephony or telegram everywhere, right? The only problem was the earlier Hitler would say that the differentiation was between print and print print and print and this telegraph kind of stuff, wherein which the information gets abstracted, right? So a codification of information, that is where we are coming to, right? So when you're talking about some sort of genomic information, when you talk about this becomes a clue to understand what you mean by the genomic information, right? So informatization of life itself, your life itself is getting converted into a code, right? For example, a genetic code, right? So it kind of confuses the boundary between the human and the machine, right? That sort of stuff. So you have this interface of technology, computer science, and biology, and you say that biology is computational. What do you mean by bioinformatics? Biology is computational in the sense that you can you can you can map the human genome. That there was a human genome project, right? Map the whole DNA of the entire race of the world. Then computation is biological. You use your DNA strands to resolve certain computational problems itself. So here, the biological and the digital are not ontologically distinct, but inherent in each other. They are there in each other. As biology informs the digital, and digital corporealizes the biological, right? And that is where we kind of connected with the pandemic situation. So when you talk about this sort of an interface between biology and technology, wherein which life itself can be considered as an informational, or the informatization of life itself, right? So you say DNA code is a genetic, it's a genetic code, it's an informational code, right? It's an informational code in the sense that, like you can talk about uh, human genome project, like at the molecular level you are trying to identify the secret code of life, and that code of life that your biology is susceptible to certain codification. We were talking about the biologicals earlier in sort of surveillance. We are talking about codes and passwords. Now we are talking about genetic information and genetic engineering. What do you mean by genetic engineering? Basically, you are actually decoding and recoding it, right? uh, how much time have I, Mayuk? It's already 50
Yes,
minutes.
yes. I mean, you can take your time. It's not a problem. You can take.
Okay. Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you talk about DNA is not just a code, but that a code that did calculation and computation. So when you look at DNA, it has input, output, storage, and processing capabilities. So when you talk about DNA, it's a self-regulating system which is having an informational feedback. It has a communication system which sending messages in the form of RNA or proteins. It is the core of a computer. It simulates the core of a computer with storage in chromosomes and processing algorithms, which is genes. So when you are talking about life is informational, you can find that simulation of the cybernetic system in life. Then how do you kind of distinguish between life and technology? What do you mean by human and technology? Where does it and where does it start, right? If do you think that the life itself is technological, right? So this 20th century genetics emerges from the 19th century thermodynamics and cybernetics, basically, right? So you have some principles operating in the new administration of life. This is actually how do you kind of deal with your life, and how life becomes more and more important in this informational ontology. When you're talking about informational ontology, information is not limited to certain machines alone, right? You say surveillance mechanism, you say other like biometrics, Aadhaar card, and all those biometrics. There is a negotiation of the self and the body coming in, but here it goes to the inside of the body, right? So you have two principles majorly operating in genetics. One is the control principle, that you call genetic engineering. The second is the storage principle, what you call gene sequencing. What do you mean by mapping the human genome? Basically, what you're mapping, storage principle, it's basically a memory. Your DNA is a memory. It's a genetic memory, right? So when you say genetic engineering, this control principle, that refers to the ability to manipulate DNA. You have series of cut and paste operations over there. You have a control over the genetic material, and you try to manipulate the genetic material, right? And the computer-based gene sequencing technology kind of it makes the human genome project a feasible reality, right? So you can control the gene sequencing, and there is a capacity to store large amounts of genetic information. These are all happening at the molecular and at the genetic level, where in which life biology is treated as technology. So here in this sort of communication, your biological life itself become the medium, right? So life is susceptible to certain codifications. So there is an informatic recontextualization of biological components and process. It is basically the understanding of biology as informational, right? So it is where that you can ask some sort of a question: where does the technology ends and where is basically life begins? So is there any primordial life which is kind of completely untouched by technology? When you talk about, like, the social media, I want to go into the wilds and just be aware of all the technological gadgets, and I just want to assert myself. If you think yourself like, looking at the genetic information and the genetic composition, and you do you still think that it is not purely technological? So this is the question. This is a sort of question which comes back to us when you are talking about the informational ontology, and at this particular conjuncture, when you're talking about the pandemic, the informational ontology. When you talk about the information, we are talking about virus. What does virus do? These are little vehicles which carry instructions how to make more of themselves. Virus is something. What do you mean by the viral ontology? Why do you say that some video has gone viral? Basically, it is this contagious nature of the video, like the digital and the biological has some sort of, like, they have certain common terminologies, they have certain common characteristics as well, right? You say video become viral. Now we are talking about the viral disease that we have, right? The whole world is standstill right now just because of the contagious nature of that particular virus. You're talking about a video becoming viral. It's just like this, a contagious nature of that video, right? So when you talk about the virus, it also carries an information. That the information is something, how to replicate it, to reproduce. What they do, they smuggle these information to our cells and secretly asking our cells to make more viruses, and it kind of spreads throughout the body. So what do you do against a virus? Basically, what do you mean by a vaccine? You invent a vaccine, you identify the intruder, You identify a particular portion which you can identify, that like, you see that person and you identify a particular feature of that person to identify that person. So that particular feature could be called an antigen, right? Antigen is a distinguished feature, right? And what they do is that, like, it tries, the vaccine kind of identify the intruder, and they identify that antigen, that feature, and they try to seek out and destroy anything which has that antigen, right? And subduing the virus. So when you talk about this injecting vaccine is also like, it can, you say immunity can be developed by two ways, like, one in which you say that we are talking about a herd immunity, where in which the antibodies, that is like that our body generates, the person who kind of successfully survived the infection, or either through synthetic antibodies made in a lab. So what vaccine makes us, what vaccine kind of informs our immune by showing the body what a virus looks like. It shows the body how a virus looks like. So basically what vaccine is taking advantage, what vaccine takes advantage of is of sort of a memory our body develops, right? And it kind of informs that memory, and it tries to, like, and the body remembers that to whenever the body recognizes that antigen, it kind of kills it. So it is in this context, when you're talking about that, it is in this context that I am trying to connect the informational ontology into the pandemic, to the pandemic. And I'm not talking, it is not a reflection on COVID situation, it's not just a critique of, like, any material on COVID or something, but I was just trying to, when I was asked to give a lecture, I was just trying um, to make you, to give you sort of an idea how to kind of engage with this question from a media studies perspective, or from what you say, sort of a communication perspective. What exactly is the problem of communication in this context, and how do you connect the information ontology and the pandemic? And that is also, in another way, it is also kind of trying to understand what you mean by the informational ontology, also the complexities of the informational ontology. When you talk about information revolution, right? You say, what do you mean by that revolution in the second part? You would say you are very clear about the industrial revolution, what exactly it brings to you, right? It brought to you. But when you talk about the information revolution, what exactly it brought to you? That you have to really know. For that, you have to really know the medium, the digital medium, the cybernetics, right? So that is where we sort of explode the question. And this paradigm is sort of like, help us to understand the situation that we are in also. Like, it is not something that can be relegated only to social media, or to other sort of, like, surveillance mechanisms or something, but it's something about codification, and it can even talk about something which is happening at the very molecular level, genetic level. Like, you say your own memory, your DNA genetic memory, which is really huge. Your genetic memory, you analyze your DNA, you can get to know your where your descent itself, like, it carries a memory that sort of bigger. It's very nano, but it contains that much of sort of a miniaturization, but at the same time it carries a lot of memory which you can not really even imagine, right? It is also a sort of a code. It is not that life can be completely reduced to a code, but at the same time this is susceptible to mutation. It adapts. It is not something that code, like, it's not that the code remains, but the structure adapts. It adapts to the environment. It has a feedback loop as well. So the communication paradigm is largely set in this, like, when you're talking about this, is what I wanted to explain to you. And it is not something, as I said earlier, it is not something of my personal research, findings of my personal research. This I have culled from various theoreticians in order to give you an idea about, like, how to think about the problem right now in the informational context. And Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Manoj, for such a brilliant lecture. I mean, I was absolutely glued to the perceptions you had given. I mean, it's absolutely different from usually the usual way we think about various things. It's absolutely a different perception. So we have some questions here. So I'm taking a few questions
Yeah,
for you. Yeah. So
yeah.
this is from our third year student pass out who are about to pass out and whose exams are stalled
Okay.
due to this this current condition. So Priyashmita,
Yeah.
she's going to ask you the first question.
Yep.
Good evening, sir. Good afternoon, sir. So I'm Priyashmita
Okay.
Datta, final year student of Sri Shiksha College. So my question is from the first half of your lecture. That is, we were talking about
Yeah.
surveillance society and how a surveillance society
Mm-hmm.
functions. So accepting the
Yeah.
fact that we live in a country of law democracy and quoting what George Orwell had said in his 1984 novel, that democracy is the new big brother, and assuming that we live in a sort of oligarchy come of situation in politically, don't the concepts of development paradigm and diffusion of innovation or the agenda setting theory that we learn, these sort of kind of have a catalytic effect on journalism being regulated by a handful of people, and hence as a repercussion we have the imbalance of information and the kind of differences that the first world countries and the third world countries have to go through. uh, and in retrospect, if I see that when we come to talk about online news mediums and digital platform where citizen journalism has become a thing, and it comes without gatekeeping, it sort of promotes fake news as well. So how do we deal in a situation like that?
Yeah. See, I'm not saying that those things are not relevant at all. Like, you say faking the news. Like, what do you mean? The concept of fakeness. Um, this gets into another dimension wherein which uh, you say uh, the the discussion on the real and the simulacrum, the power of the false, and all those sort of things, which is slightly complicated philosophical which are sort of philosophical concepts. But I do completely agree that, like, there is some sort of like whatever the points that you have raised are completely relevant. But my point was to, like, my perspective was to not to look it from that perspective. When you talk about social media, you have all these kind of concerns coming up. You say, like, you even you are quoting, I think you were quoting 1984, right? So you were talking about big brother. It's not that, like, society was completely devoid of any sort of surveillance in the past itself. Like, you that when we talked about the spaces of enclosure, uh, which Foucault talks about, like, you have various institutions. All the other theoreticians also talk about, like, various sort of institutions. You have the division between the ideological state apparatus and the repressive state apparatus. That's also an institution, right? But this fails at one point of time. This sort of classification won't be useful for us to understand the sort of control mechanism that is being placed on us. That is where but we are into a societies of control. That is what he means by the transition from the disciplinary society to the societies of control. And it is in the societies of control, you say, like, as I used to say, like, you say fake news. Like, it is not just like one news just being getting propagated. It has a viral logic to it, a contagious logic to it. It is being repeated several times, and it also kind of complicates a problem of, like, the problem of the real and the copy also. You don't know where the real is, basically what are kind of forwards that you are getting. The continuous replication of images. You are inundated with images, like, the information is also kind of replicated. You are put in a situation where in which you are perplexed with the question of original and the copy. Where do you find the original, and where do you find the copy of it? That is something which is again a theoretical problem, which doesn't really address your question of fake news and all. but that has to be dealt in its own paradigm, which I am not really aware of. Like, I haven't got into the problem of fake news, but this fakeness can be discussed theoretically. Yeah, what do you mean by, like, you say copy or the fallen copy or whatever it be? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, thank you for answering. I mean, by fake news, what I generally meant is when what happens with citizen journalism or something is that these people are not somebody who has academically, or they do not have the skill development that it takes to become a journalist or a reporter or something. So it comes with a lot of perspective, and sort of it dilutes the agenda what it really wants to say, and that comes with when there's no gatekeeping. But also with gatekeeping, a sort of surveillance comes in. But thank you, I really understand what you wanted to say, and thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, I got your point. You say that the surveillance is some sort of necessary. You say by invoking the question of gatekeeping. Are you trying to say that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, like, see it's like a
Yeah, yeah,
both
yeah.
sides of a
No,
coin.
I got your point.
And
You got your
yeah,
point. Like, in the context of fake news, you say that there is some sort of a screening which is required.
yes, I mean, what happens is it does more harm than any good, I guess, when we talk about just
Okay.
fake news.
Yeah. So one way of, like, there is a, yeah, fine. It is from the journalistic perspective, it is very important. But one way or the other, how do we look at the organization of the society itself? Like, one pressing question for us to be that, like, how free you are, right? Are we kind of being instructed by certain structures, right? That is what I said. Like, when Virilio talks about speed, he talks about your own perception. How do you see your outside world? Your own that conditions of perception is being determined by certain other principles, and can you know that principle of your own perception? And when you say, when you are free, right, in your life, I have my freedom to go wherever you can, at what level your freedom gets negotiated, right?
True.
When you say you are a free person, right? India is a democratic country, it's a free person, where all this is getting negotiated. That is the way in which that you are trying to understand the ordering of a society, how the society controls us in one way or the other. That is what is being explained in the transition from a disciplinary society to societies of control. When societies of control, you don't need certain spaces of enclosure to control you. Spaces of enclosure will be like a space demarcated. Your university space will be completely demarcated from the other space, right? Now we are in a
True.
situation where in which your university space kind of floats, like, it disperses. It
Hmm.
is a diffuse space right now. We are all having this online space. We are having this conversation
Yeah.
here. So a new form of situation emerges, wherein which this enclosed spaces cannot really hold, and it will definitely deteriorate itself. Like, when you encounter more and more reality, like, when we get into the, or for Virilio, it will be the speed. You be sure of it. When you get 5G, your perception is going to be changing for sure. You might be knowing it better than me, because you might be knowing it, like, the various technologies that you're going to use for your journalism purposes and all, like augmented reality, virtual reality, and all those sort of stuffs. It's kind of like, gives you some sort of, it gives you a different sort of a perception. But Virilio's concept is to,
Yeah.
like, it is again speed. It's 5G. It's
Hmm.
speed of the transmission of images, information. So Virilio's point is to, like, to understand it, like, first, at the first place, what are the conditions for you to perceive certain things? You see it, it's fine,
Hmm.
but what are the conditions for that visibility? That you have to know, right? That is what, when I meant, like, you say surveillance and all those things, like, you can take it to the fake news also. You need a gatekeeping, you need an editor, like, but what happens when the news are being, like, rejected by the gatekeeping communities? The
Hmm.
editor has a
Yeah.
command over it, and he can reject it, right? So
Hmm.
there lies a liberative potential of the social media. But at the same time,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, it has another potentiality also, right? It can
Hmm.
be. used in another sense as well. But at the same time, you can make use of it in a viral sense. You can make use of in a positive sense as well. You can make something viral. You can have a discussion. You can inform the world about something that is happening at your place, right?
Mhm.
There is a
Yeah.
possibility
Thank you,
there.
sir.
I would say that much.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Manoj. It was a very, very nice answer. I think it has provoked a lot of thought. So I'll take the next question once again from one of our students, one of the final year students, Ohana Basu. So yes, Ohana, put your question, please.
Hello, am I
Just a minute.
audible?
Just a minute.
Uh,
Manoj got disconnected. Manoj got disconnected. Just a minute.
I'm sorry. I think I got disconnected in
Yes,
between.
yes.
Can
No,
you
no
hear
problem.
me?
Yes, yes.
Can
You
yes.
are audible. You're audible.
because
You're audible.
Good afternoon, sir.
I was trying to see the chat.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Uh,
Yes, Ohana, please go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Ohana Basu, and firstly, I would like to say that it has been a complete delight to be a part of this enlightening session, sir. I have two questions for you. Firstly, uh, what my knowledge is about informational ontology is that we often see that media also play the role of agenda setting based on issues that are sometimes controversial in nature for the society by deciding what kind of political topics people can talk about or what kind of information that they can have access to. Thus, we often see that the plight of the underprivileged becomes the source of content for some content creators to earn money, whether social media becomes a potent weapon. And since you talked about viral ontology as to what kind of content goes viral in social media and what kind of content doesn't, we often see that the truthful events that are sometimes recovered by media does not get the same amount of share that the previous one does. So we can see that the ruling authority allows this access to information to misuse it as per its political and strategical convenience. So do you think that the media it prevents the media to comply to its normative principles as proposed by Fred Siebert and Wilbur Schramm?
What was the last point? What is the last point? I didn't get exactly the last sentence.
Sir, I was saying that do you think that this access to information by the government, do you
Hmm.
think that it allows it to misuse this information as per its political and strategical convenience, so that in some way it prevents the media to comply to its normative principles as proposed by Fred Siebert and Wilbur Schramm?
Okay. Uh, First of all, what I intended with the talk was not to kind of to give you a larger idea about what you mean by sort of a communication and what do you mean by the informational ontology. When I said ontology, ontology is a philosophical word in which you talk about your own being, your own existence. So you say an informational revolution. I would say that informational revolution. When I said, like, when you say industrial revolution, you know what it means. Like when you say informational revolution, what it really implies, right? Like what exactly effects that it has on your life, as or in the sense that you as a media student or a communication student, what is the communication aspect involved in that? For it is quite natural for us to kind of identify informational ontology with social media very easily, right? So that is where we talked about, like, it is not about social media alone. It is about sort of a kind of it sort of reconfigured our life altogether. It has gone to levels where in which you can't even imagine, right? In the sense that we talk about the genetic information, the kind of scientific advancements that we have in the field of genetics and molecular biology is all coming from the cybernetics. You talk about information at that molecular level, right? You kind of configure the world through information. What do you mean by this information revolution? It is not only just the media, the media versus the social media. Definitely not. And that is what, like, if you read McLuhan very closely, you will say that what he mean by the medium is the message, right? You need to know the medium. That is what, like, I said, like, there is certain numbness effect that medium can impart to you, right? Even if you want to understand the social media in great detail, you have to know what you mean by the informational medium. What is it capable of? Whatever you are talking about, when you talk about the agenda setting and the political parties and all those things, it comes at a uh, at, at 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 the subset level. Like, it is not the main set. Like, if you have the major thing, it comes inside. You say agenda setting of the political party and your intervention in that, and sort of liberating social media, liberating it. Or, of course, it is, we are not even talking about the agenda setting of a particular media house, but we are talking about certain mechanisms which control you altogether from the very outset itself. How informational society can be a society of surveillance, and we ourselves partakes in that surveillance. We willingly partakes in that surveillance just because of various reasons: for safety, for yourself, to keep yourself, for convenience, right? So why do you have your fingerprint on your phone? Like, the biometrics. You need to protect your data in that sense, right? You need to have, so you use your biologicals there, right? You give away your details to social media. So when you say it becomes easy for the government, the official authorities to control you, anyone else to surveil you in that sense. Then information becomes a commodity. Information, what do you mean by human genome project? A human genome project is actually codifying, collating all the genetic information of all the races possible in the world, in order to do experiments. They have their own reasons to do that, but it is the data capital. If you have that much of information, then you are the capitalist right now. Capitalism is not something related with, of course, it creates wealth. The speed, if you are really having a higher speed, like, now we are, like, you look at the way in which transactions are happening in stock market. It is happening in terms of nanoseconds. If you are little bit late, you lose or you gain. That's a different thing, but there will be a significant difference, right? So speed matters. So when you talk about the control, we are talking about an abstract control that is on us, an abstract control mechanism which you cannot really alter. You can go and, like, see that media has some sort of an agenda. You can critique them on that basis. That is not, there is something, an abstract control over you, which happens with the informational revolution. The information, so this algorithms, computation, when it is being controlled, when it is, like you say, you have these various terminologies which you use to kind of list your things in the Google first. It is already algorithmically configured, already controlled, right? So if you are living in a society of control, which is not, which like, or the other end of the control is not in your hand, but it is being controlled by an abstract entity, or you say capital, for that matter. Like, let us call that abstract entity the capital, the new capital, right? So that controls. So we are talking about that sort of a controlling. right? When that sort of a problem that we are facing in the informational revolution. My intention was for you to open up the whole discussion of communication from the signification side to something, what you say, what are the kind of revolutions that happening at the informational level. It is not only, it is cannot be relegated or reduced to the inventions or the discussions that you have within media, but you have to go outside to see what other ways it is it is exploring things. Like, even when you say medium, for McLuhan, when he said medium is a message, medium can be anything. Like he said, like an extension, medium as the extension of man. He said wheel is an extension of your foot, right? Wheel is an extension of your foot, right? So in that sense, anything can be a medium. So medium should not be relegated to something what you call social media or something. Your life itself can be the medium, your body itself can be the medium, right? And it gives you some sort of sense to understand or to relate the pandemic with the information revolution. Like, it is not exactly on how pandemic behaves or something, it is not a kind of a critical take on that, but you will get an idea how to, being a communication student, from the communication perspective, from the perspective of information, how you can interact with these questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering this, and seeing that you have already answered my second question. I have to admit that the aspect that you have chosen is completely unique with respect to informational ontology. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manoj. I'm going to take a few more questions from our students.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So this is from our student, our fourth semester student Srijita Chakraborty, who has asked that is it impossible to join data which is deriving from multiple different sources unless one is an expert in multiple separate disciplines? For example, if someone is collecting data for COVID-19, is it necessary for him or her to be an expert of everything from immunochemistry to behavioral modeling? That is a question.
Yeah, that is a problem that we are facing. Like, that is one way in which I find the media studies, the irrelevance of the communication studies in our country, in the sense that they are very much comfortable in which what they are doing, and they don't want to sort of like engage with other disciplines, and where the interdisciplinarity is a no. That is where, like I said, like biology getting into technology. What do you mean by the new permutations that we're seeing? You say bioinformatics, biotechnology, home economics, neuroeconomics, neurology and economics coming together, sort of a rhizomic connection that happens within the discipline. Like, you create hybrids out of that. You need to crisscross. I mean, like, in that sense, like, it's humanly impossible to study all of these things and do a research on COVID-19. That is not possible. But you should be really open. At what level? At the epistemic level, you should have an engagement with these things. I may not be able to talk about genetics in its own jargon. I am completely incapable of that. I don't know much about it. But there is some way wherein which you can connect these things together, right? When you talk about information, you connect cybernetics you extend it to the level of genetic revolution, like, the sort of genetic advancement that you have. That is also kind of manipulation of information, right? Modulating the information in that sense. So while you're talking about media studies, if you go by McLuhan's message, what is medium? Anything can be medium for that matter. As I said, like, wheel is an extension of your foot. So if that is a case, then you have to really step out of your disciplinary comforts, and then you have to explore other things, right? Which I think cultural studies and literature studies to an extent do, right? but somehow the communication departments in our country, or in, I'm so sorry, I don't know what is the situation, but I've seen mostly there is sort of a confinement to the comfort zone. Basically, there should be some sort of an interdisciplinary engagement, like,
Right.
to explore what is really happening.
Right. So I'm taking the next question, which is from our second semester student Dia Chakraborty. So actually, she was the first to ask this question towards the beginning of your lecture. So she has asked, "Sir, since you are talking of philosophers, according to Chomsky, he says media's role is to train minds of the people to to a virtuous attachment to their government, to the arrangements of the socio-economic political order. So, can we say that this principle in operation, politics becomes an interaction among the groups of investors who compete for control of the state?"
Yeah. I think Chomsky's intervention into the media scenario is completely from a different angle, and he's directly engaging with the political issues, and like maybe the government's role in it, and uh, manufacturing of consent, right? So you say there is a point in it, like, you say they manufacture consent. It's actually deals with what? It deals with the meaning making that we actually explained in the very first, in the middle of it, like what happens with cybernetics. The meaning portion get, I'm not saying that the meaning is not completely relevant. You say that is where in which you say you consider it as a sign. Let us put it theoretically, like you place it where Chomsky comes in. You say it's a process of signification, right? You have signs coming in, you make meaning out of it, and you bring in hegemony, you bring in ideology, all those kind of stuffs, and try to analyze what's the content of the media, right? You're talking about the content of the media. No, but I am saying that I'm not saying that the content of the media is not at all relevant. You can have a textual, you can have a representational criticism of that, but I am much more concerned about the medium itself. Before coming to that, you have to really know the medium. So the medium itself is capable of creating certain effects on you. It is not only if you are conveniently forgetting the medium and only focusing on the ideological or the meaningful aspects of it, right? So then you are not really recognizing what the medium is capable of. That is what, like, when Foucault talks, or when the transition from Foucault to Deleuze is at that level, at the level of ordering the society, ordering the knowledge. When you say the transition from disciplinary society to societies of control should be understood at that level,
Right.
where in which there is some sort of, when you say societies of control, there is a control mechanism, an abstract diagram that is there already, which you are trying to grapple with, even though you find certain moments of liberation within the medium itself. You find, like, social media or something, but what exactly it is, there is some sort of a control mechanism attached to it. Like, we have to really be aware of it, and we need to really check in what all ways that this is, like, kind of controlling us, kind of, in a McLuhan sense, kind of numbing us, our perception, right? It puts you into a delusion. Baudrillard talks about it. Baudrillard is also talking about the simulatory effects, 3 orders of simulation. Like, they are all talking about how the real is being reconstituted through a particular medium. You say Gulf War didn't happen, you are actually reconstituting certain things. He is problematizing the concept of the real itself. Like, what do you mean by the real? He gives an example of the Disneyland and other stuffs and all. He gives the 3 orders of simulation in order to explore the relation between what you mean by the copy and the real. What is really mean by the fake and the real, right? The constitution of real itself, the principle of the constitution of the real itself has to be understood. Like, at that level, at another level, of course, from a developmental perspective, from a political perspective, what role media should have, or what should be the position of media, All those things are ethical concerns of certain ethical journalism and all those things. So once the meaning gets evaporated from this, like when I talked about cybernetics, when the meaning gets evaporated from the scenario, that is where you, like how it become an engineering problem to kind of identify the difference between the noise and the signal. What do you mean by noise and signal? Otherwise, I'm talking to you, it is signal to you because it makes sense to you. If there is
Right.
something, some sound coming in, it's absolute nonsense, right? It still operates at the level of meaning. But what happens when it gets converted into some frequency or some, like, some mathematical functions? And then you have no idea how to kind of divide between, how to kind of discern what is the noise and what is the signal. You can only give different frequencies to different sounds, right? We can order it in such a way, right? So medium is something which conducts it, and knowledge of the medium is quite important in that. Like, so when he talks about informational ontology, that is why I said why I put it as informational ontology in the title, because it reconfigures our existence. We need to know how effective it is in that sense, like, like how much power it has to control the life. It when I say it's sort of an abstract machine. It's not just something like a machine that you identify. It's sort of a control as an abstract machine. That is something what Deleuze meant, I guess. That's my reading.
So just a last couple of questions from our faculty of English from English department. She's from English department, Devolina Gotakutta. So she has asked, when you talk of informational ontology, especially how the body negotiates with the surveillance, is not the body being again inscribed by a certain power network that regulates? If you can elaborate.
Of course, I'm not talking about a body which is sort of a political body or something. I'm not really kind of completely negating the other aspects of the body, the inscribed body. Body could be inscribed in different ways. Like, if it's a female body, if it's a Muslim body, if it's a Dalit body, all those cultural connotations are there. That's absolutely not my concern there itself. Like when you are talking about the information and how, or surveillance mechanism, how the body negotiates, how the self negotiates in that sense, like, your own identity, your own subjectivity, your own body, all those things are negotiated at one level. But that doesn't really mean that the body can be inscribed in different ways. It can be inscribed in different ways. I'm not really kind of nullifying it. It can be, and I completely agree to that point.
And what she has written, that nonsense noise depends on the receiver, how it is being received, decoded in the communication process, and a signal might become nonsensical. What is your take? You have already answered.
Can I get?
Yes, please.
No, I didn't get a question.
Yes. No, that is actually her observations. She had actually asked for your opinion. I think you have already answered this. That is, nonsense noise depends on the receiver. How is it being received? Decoded the communication process, and a signal might become nonsensical. So that is what is your take? She has asked. I think you have already answered this part to some extent. Yeah. So what I'm going to ask you as a listener, I'm going to ask you. So that is, how do you actually? I mean, what is your perception basically? What is your take about what we call the cognitive need and the information overload or information revolution in this era of information society? Now, what is your take? I just want to, I mean, I'm asking you just from the perspective of a listener.
You say, is there a cognitive necessity for information overload? Is that what your question is?
Yes, more or less. I mean, is it really increasing the cognitive needs? This information overload, is it really increasing the cognitive need of the audience, or it is a kind of really overload in the truest sense of the term.
Yeah. So this can be understood in the terms of, like, the way in which she asked the a nonsense, the question of nonsense, the noise and the signal. Like,
Right,
you can convert it into the informational cultures as well. You say, like, it in the when it comes to signification, of
right,
course, it is depending on the receiver, like whether it's sense or nonsensical.
right,
And you can say, like, what sort of information that you are, like, you might see certain advertisement nonsensical right now, like wherever you go. Like Facebook also carries a lot of advertisement, like, don't even listen. You just wait for that to get over, like in the middle of a video or something, right? So you don't really listen to it. Like, so that sort of a nonsensical, her question is relevant in that context, in a cultural context. I don't undermine that. So when you say cognitive need for information overload, uh, information overload, yeah, you can say that we are inundated by the flow of information, like, that. So what I was trying to what I was exploring is also kind of reflecting on what you mean by the information society. And pandemic becomes the context in which I thought, like, when you told me to give a lecture, I was thinking, these are UG students, undergraduate students. I've never taught undergraduate students so far, so I don't know. Like, I've taught only postgraduate students and above, so I don't know. But I was thinking of, like, I should talk about something interesting to them, or something to give them a perspective to move ahead. Like, something they should do with it. They should be capable of doing it. At least do a very good course, like, where they take the communication studies to the next level. What they have done, if they can take a line of flight in that sense. So what I was thinking about the topic, when I was thinking about the topic, what I had in mind was basically to critically look at what you mean by, like, mostly people say informational society, informational overload. What exactly this informational revolution or informational overload or information society imply, that is not really discussed most of the times, even in media, especially in media studies. Some of the literature departments or cultural studies departments still operate on the fringes of it, like try to kind of connect these things, connect different things together, and try to explore the situation. So information overload, I don't think there is a cognitive need for any sort of an information overload. And I do accept the fact that we are overloaded with information. I also feel
right,
very much saturated with this. Like, you cannot really look at, even for COVID, for that matter. Like, I was almost following all the writings on COVID-19, and it's like a lot of information wherein which, like, if you do an ethnography right now, or like ethnography which can be done in the internet, you do an ethnography for analyzing the COVID, like, you are inundated. There is no depth for any material. You just have to be there. Like, there is a lot of information flowing in. There is no depth for any sort of information. But the way in which these informations are manipulated, like the way how, like, I was part of Jamia when the protest was going on. Like, you say they use face recognition apps. They collected all the materials from that everyone posted on Instagram to identify the people who were in the protest. They took photos. They use face recognition apps. The ways in which the subjects are being controlled, or you can say that, like, those who oppose the protest, or those who oppose the right to protest or something. Of course, they can say that it is a state prerogative to kind of use that and to find the culprits, or like whatever it be, if they have done damage or something. But state make use of it. It's not just state. It's, if you look at the larger uh, capital right now, what do you mean by post capitalism, or what do you call bio-capitalism? It is all based on this information. Bio-capital is more dangerous, like, in the sense that, like, your biologicals, your organ, it starts from organ transplantation to tissue banks. And we normally have economic banks earlier. Now you have tissue banks, blood banks were there, tissue banks right now. There are different sort of banks, organ banks, right, wherein which you can even donate your body parts, can be kind of sold, and transplantation is made possible. So the modulation of life, That is what we meant. Like, what do you mean by genetic engineering? That sort of an engineering is happening in our life also, using certain codes. Genetic engineering or stem cell research may be able to help you in some way rectify your or you replenish your liver or something. Stem cell research might find useful, but
Right.
what you say, you are living in an engineered society, already engineered society. Then what are you, like, in that situation? I think that is a danger of information. When Virilio and other people are kind of talking about it as in sort of an information bomb, it's sort of like, sort of an emergent situation that he wants that necessitates some action, or you have to regain your own perception to understand the numbing effect of this particular medium or whatever the medium. So you have to, I think that is quite a valid criticism to kind of explore it, to kind of know what you are, know what in which situation you are, to regain your own consciousness, like, at least, like, what situation you are in, like, what are the controls that are being imposed on me, in what ways I'm being controlled, like, what is your possibilities and what is your impossibilities, what you mean by the threshold of your possibility, right? So where I'm being curtailed. So this quest is not something new. This has been from the ages onwards, like where you say, kind of, you say the absolute freedom. Absolute freedom, I don't know, like the freedom from all sorts of alienation in a Marxian sense, right?
Right.
Marx made it more economically in that sense, but you have other forms of control right now. It is not only purely economic. You have other forms of control in your life, and the mode of capitalism itself has gone and it has developed. It was enlarged into something, to a level wherein which it addresses many other domains. So you
Right.
cannot really pinpoint it to economic alone or cultural alone or something. That is where you say it goes beyond the logic of industrial capitalism. So you need to have a different perception of it, different way, different technology, different methodology to understand even it, how to kind of combat with it. So information overload that you are talking about, information overload, what about all these kind of information gathering? How like, you say WikiLeaks kind of informed us how much the information load that they are, like, how they are tapping all the sort of information that is being communicated, right? They are
Right.
all getting all those information in order to what? In order to regain the power, in order to keep the
Absolutely.
power intact, right?
Absolutely.
So power lies with the information management itself. Even though there is loads of information, we are tired of that, but at least we should be aware. And I'm really skeptical of all these kind of instruments right now, especially of my phone, like how deceptive it can be, like, so once those who are really concerned about the question of freedom and other things, who, I think they will think twice to switch before switching on the mobile phone or getting, like, the smartphones, I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Manoj, for such a brilliant session. I have I had the opportunity to invite you for this web lecture, and to our audience, this is worth mentioning that this was Dr. Manoj's first address exclusively to the students of any college from Kolkata. So that is, I mean, it was really a pleasure, it was really a privilege to listen to Dr. Manoj N.Y for such a brilliant session, which has provoked various thoughts among various individuals who have actually been witnessed who have witnessed this uh, web lecture. So I would like to request our senior most faculty, Sri Shubhit Chakraborty, to formally conclude the session with a vote of thanks.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, yes, Shubhita, you're audible.
Hello,
Yes,
am I
Shubhita, you're
audible?
audible. Yes, Shubhita, you're audible.
Hello. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank our honorable speaker, Dr. Manoj, for his enthralling deliberations on today's topic of media analysis. It was a great learning experience for all of us. I'd like to thank our principal, Dr. Aditi De, for lending the support in this pursuit of academic excellence. Also, I would like to thank our Honorable Secretary, Sri P.K. Sharma ji, for giving us this precious opportunity. I express my warm regards for all the faculty members for making this a success. Last but not least, my dear students, it happened just because of you. Without you, it was impossible. Thank you to everybody for all your support. If I forgot to mention anyone's name, please forgive me. Once again, thank you, Dr. Manoj. We hope that we will get your support in our future endeavors. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Of course.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Shubhidra. So we formally call it a day.
So with this, we are coming to.
Yes, yes. And just one thing to mention, that I had asked Manoj for a 1 hour for a lecture which the duration would be 1 hour, and it's already 1 hour and 45 minutes, and he is absolutely fine with it. And it's very encouraging for all of us that we are asking questions after questions, and he's answering every question. So thank you
No,
very much, Manoj.
I was little puzzled in between, because I had prepared a very long lecture, and I found that at the middle of the talk, I found that no, it's not able to cover all of the things, and I kind of like summarized a lot of things which I wanted to explain a lot, but anyway, we had a very fruitful discussion after the thing,
Yes,
and
and
thanks
we are
Subil
looking forward.
Chakravarti for the note.
And we are looking forward to a session in future, and we'll definitely keep in touch with regarding this.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, thanks to all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
viewers. Thank you.
Yeah.